In today's episode of You Can Build a Social Networking Site, we'll take the mockup we made in the last episode and turn it into a fully working demo in just a few minutes. So let's get started. We're going to use Vercel to host our website and our database. Before we go straight into setting up the database, we should set up hosting first because using Vercel is more streamlined in that order. The first thing we'll need to do is to get our code into a GitHub repository. Next, you want to log into Vercel with your GitHub account and add a new project. It'll prompt you to import a Git repository, and this project should be at the top already. Next.js is integrated into Vercel extraordinarily well, so you don't need to configure anything for now, you should just hit the big white deploy button. Once your deployment finishes, Vercel will give you a link where you can reach the hosted instance of your project. Every single commit has its own subdomain, so you can time travel to earlier versions of your project if you want. You also have a main subdomain that always has the latest version. The next step is to actually create and connect the database. We're going to be using PostgreSQL because it's integrated into Vercel. I'll give it a name and pick the region that's closest to me, and it'll spin it up in moments. Next, you want to go to the .m.local credentials tab, click on copy secret, go back to your IDE, create a .m.local file in the root directory of your project, and paste your secrets here. This will allow our Next.js project to access these secrets without needing to commit them into our Git repository. Now that we have our database set up, we'll need something to connect to it. We'll be using Drizzle ORM. This will allow us to define our tables in JS and also query them very easily. We'll also add Drizzle Kit, which will help us with database migrations and editing our data by hand. Since we already defined the schema for our posts in the previous episode, we can quickly rewrite them as a table definition. Let's create a new DB directory at the root directory of our project, and let's add a schema.ts file. We can create a table with the pgtable function, passing it the underlying name of the table and its fields as an object. We'll need to add an ID field for the table to have a primary key. For now, this carries little significance, so let's just make it an auto-incrementing integer with the serial function. After that, we'll just add what we've already defined in our post schema. The user field should be a varchar, the content field is a text type, and the created at field is a timestamp. We shouldn't have to define created at every time we insert some values, so let's make it default to the current timestamp with default now. We should also add not null everywhere to disallow leaving these fields empty. Now that we have defined our post as a table, let's get rid of the old post schema and extract the type from our table declaration like so. We can delete the old schema file and import the new post type from the database schema. We'll also need to do some additional setup for Drizzle to work. Let's add a drizzle.config.ts file to the root directory of our project. This file will specify where our schema is, what kind of database we're using, and our credentials. Since we're using a .m file, we'll need to import the contents of the file using the .m library, which we'll also need to install. Now that that's done, we can run the command npx drizzle-git push::pg. This will create the tables we defined in our schema on the database we created on Vercel. If we open the Data tab on our Databases page on Vercel, we can see that we have a new table called Posts. Next, let's create a db.ts file in our src folder. This will configure Drizzle to use the Vercel Postgres library to access our database. We should export this configured instance of Drizzle so that we can import it in our components. Finally, we can open our index page and add some code to fetch the posts from our database. We select from the Posts table, and we sort our posts in descending order by the created at property, so the latest posts come up first. We need to import our database, the posts table, and the desk helper function, and we also need to make our React component async so that we can await the database's response. Next, we should display the post we fetched from the database, instead of the fake post we specified in the previous episode. We are inches away from displaying posts from our database, but since we have no posts in there yet, we are currently displaying nothing. Since we cannot create posts through our site yet, let's start Drizzle Studio, which is an interactive database viewer and editor. We simply click the link it spits out, and we can see our data right away. Let's select our post table, click on Add Record, and fill in some info. We don't need to specify the ID or the created at values since they are filled in automatically. We'll just need to make up a user and the post content. Once that's done, we can refresh our site and it will show the post we just created. We can also go back to Drizzle Studio, edit the post, go back to our site, refresh, and it'll change to the new version. Now that we have a way to display posts from the database, the next step is to put posts into the database. For that, we're going to create a new page. Let's create a post folder in our src/app folder, and let's put a new page.tsx file in there. we're going to specify a new component called NewPage. Since this is a subpage of our main layout, we don't need to specify any code to show our navbar again. We can just specify the content of this page. Let's just put a span in there for now while we figure out navigation. After that's done, if you add /new to the end of our page's URL, you can see the span we just created. Now, we should make the plus post button in our navbar navigate to this page. Let's edit our list link item component. We should add an optional href prop which specifies where our link should navigate to. Let's make the default value a hash symbol, which won't do anything if clicked on. Then, let's wrap our children pass-through with a link component, which is basically like the regular anchor tag, but with some Next.js magic wrapped around it to make navigating inside our web app faster. Now if we go to our navbar and add href equals /new to our plus post link list item, we can navigate to the new post page by clicking that link in the navbar. Now that we can actually visit the page, let's build it. Let's replace our placeholder span tag with a main tag that just takes up all space and centers its child. I also had to pop into our globals.css and add a height:100% property to our HTML and body tags for this to work. And I also made our body in layout.tsx into a flexbox with a vertical direction. Next, let's add a form tag that we'll use to submit our post. In it, we'll create an input that specifies the username, a text area that specifies the post content, and a submit button. I also added some styling to the form so that the input fields are displayed one by one and they have a bit of a gap between them. Now that our page looks passable, let's implement the logic behind it. We'll be using Next.js server actions, which lets us submit data from the UI back to the server side so that we can access the database. If you don't yet understand the distinction between server side and client side, don't fret, we'll be going over it in another video, or you can read the excellent Next.js documentation, the link is in the description. Let's create a new async function in our component called newPost. We need to add the useServer keyword to specify that it's a server action, and it should have a form data parameter so that we can access the data our form tag is sending over. Let's extract the user and content values from the form, make sure that they're actually strings, and let's insert them to our database using Drizzle. We'll need to use db.insert with our post schema, and we can use the values function to specify the post we're inserting. You can also add more verification to make sure that the username or content isn't empty, but I didn't bother with that. Finally, we should redirect the user to the index page so that they can see their new post. I also ended up adding some more styling to the form, giving the inputs transparent backgrounds, rounded borders, and some padding. After that, we can visit our page, type in a username and some content, click the submit button, and boom, it works. We can also open Drizzle Studio again to make sure that it made it to the database and that the created ad field is correct. Our users can create posts now. But since we still have an arbitrary username field, we cannot actually tell who is who. In the next episode, we will be building authentication, which will make our social site actually kinda usable already. So, stay tuned and see you in the next one.